So, I recently bought a small bass boat, and my first mate, Legoff, and I have been super excited to explore the lake, its islands, and learn the ropes of fishing around here. We're new to Tennessee, so everything feels like an adventure. Yesterday, on the 4th of July, we decided to head out to this really secluded part of the lake that we've nicknamed No Man's Land. It's blocked off by a low-hanging bridge that keeps most boaters out, but my little boat can squeeze underneath, so it feels like our secret spot. This time, we decided to venture deeper into the cove than ever before. As we trolled slowly down the lake, the path split into 3 forks. I asked Legoff which way to go, and without hesitation he said, "The middle one." So we kept straight, and as the water narrowed into a river-like channel, things started to feel off. What happened next was a chain of events that unfolded fast. We've talked about it since, trying to piece together the exact order, but here's what we remember. First, we heard this strange, vocal-like noise coming from the woods along the shoreline. It wasn't loud, but it made both of us freeze. "What was that?" Legoff asked. "A dog," I said automatically, though I didn't believe it even as the words came out. "I don't think that was a dog," Legoff replied, his voice uneasy. Then we saw a bird perched high above us on a branch, just staring. "Maybe it was that bird," Legoff suggested. "Yeah, maybe," I answered, though I wasn't convinced. Somewhere during all of this, I realized I'd drawn my pistol without even thinking about it, holding it down at my side. Legoff had the fishing bow ready. We both felt it, the overwhelming sense that we were being watched. We drifted past a rotting pine tree, half submerged in the water along the shore. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, we heard heavy, pounding footsteps crashing through the woods. They were fast, deliberate, and getting closer. At first I thought, deer? The sound was almost prancing, but as it got louder and closer, we both realized this wasn't a deer. A massive jet-black canine burst through the trees. My brain tried to rationalize it. Coyote. But it was way too big. This thing was the size of a huge German shepherd, maybe larger, and it was fast. It moved like a shadow, zigzagging between the trees, leaping with incredible speed toward the exact stretch of shoreline we were floating past. But something about it didn't look right. It didn't have the texture or detail of a normal animal. No visible fur, no face or eyes we could make out. Just this flat, blurry outline of a canine with tall, wolf-like ears. But it was unmistakably a canine shape, and it was coming straight for us. Adrenaline hit hard. My mind raced, trying to prepare for what might happen. It looked like it was charging us, but with the 15 feet of water between the boat and the shore, I felt a small sense of relief. It'd have to swim out to us, and I figured that wasn't likely. The creature reached the shoreline in seconds. Without hesitation, in one smooth, fluid motion, it leapt off the bank and dove into the water, right under the half-submerged pine tree we just passed. Stomp, 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 splash. We held our breath, waiting for it to resurface, to hear it swimming or moving toward us. All we saw were faint ripples spreading out from the splash, small and unimpressive for something that size. Afterward, Legoff kept saying the same thing. For how big it was, the splash should have been much bigger. We didn't stick around to find out more. "Watch for it to come back up," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I've never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves underwater, but there it was, right in front of us. We waited. Nothing. Just silence, broken only by the faint sound of ripples slowly fading away. We stayed frozen, staring at the spot where the creature had disappeared. Our eyes locked on the fallen pine tree it had leapt under. "Maybe it's just standing in the water under the tree," Legov said, his voice uneasy. Summoning what little courage we had left, we trolled the boat a little closer to inspect the tree. Nothing. No sign of it at all. At this point, we were in complete shock, stunned. How could it just be gone? A creature that size doesn't just vanish. We sat there for another 30 seconds in tense silence, scanning the shoreline and the water. Finally, Legov broke it. "You saw what I saw, right?" A shiver ran down my spine. "All of it," I replied. "Really, though? What the fuck was that?" Legov asked, his voice louder now. I swallowed hard and said, "I think we saw a demon." We both laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that doesn't feel real because you're still too shaken to process anything. We stayed floating near the shoreline for at least another 10 minutes, still trying to piece together what had just happened. Legov kept scanning the water, waiting for it to surface, but it never did. How could something that big, a huge, black, wolf-like creature, just disappear into thin air or water? Being skeptics, we wanted a logical explanation. There had to be one, right? But nothing added up. If it had just splashed into the water and gotten back out, then we would have seen it walking away. We would have heard it. Anything that big would have made noise on the leaves and underbrush. But instead, there was only silence. The loudest, heaviest silence I've ever felt. We're still shaken up by it, honestly. We live in Middle Tennessee, if that helps anyone figure out what the hell this could have been. We've been racking our brains for answers, but we're coming up empty. Whatever it was, we'll never forget that day. When I was 15, I had a summer job a few miles from my house. We lived in a rural, wooded area, and my parents were pretty strict about not letting me go into the woods alone. But since they both worked during the day, and my job started at noon, I had to walk to work. Against their rules and better judgment, I decided to take a shortcut through the woods instead of sticking to the road. It shaved about a mile off my walk, and I figured, what could go wrong? Every day, at the same time, I'd head out, walking through the deserted state forest. I followed a narrow deer path for about a mile until it connected to a set of railroad tracks. From there, I'd walk a couple more miles into town to get to my job. Looking back, yeah, it was a dumb move, but at 15, I didn't think much about it. The shortcut always gave me the creeps. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but I convinced myself it was just paranoia. My parents were big on warning me about the dangers of the woods, and I assumed their voices in my head were making me uneasy. Still, it was cooler, shadier, and quicker than the road, so I ignored my gut and stuck with it. They had no idea I was doing this either. They'd pick me up after work, blissfully unaware of my little routine. For weeks, everything went fine, until one day. I was deep in the woods, about a mile away from any houses, when I spotted something on the trail ahead of me. 2 pages ripped out of a porn magazine, lying there on the path. They hadn't been there the day before. I froze. It wasn't just random trash, it was too deliberate. Someone had put them there, and given how deserted this area was, they had to be meant for me. My stomach dropped. I wanted to turn back, but at that point, it would have been a longer hike to get out of the woods the other way. Plus, I'd have to climb a huge hill to get back home, and there was no one around to help if anything went wrong. So I kept walking, my heart racing with every step. This part of the woods was thick with brambles, dogwood, and rolling hills, so it was hard to see very far in any direction. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but every time I stopped walking, the sound stopped too. It was faint, but distinct, like someone had loose change jingling in their pocket. Definitely not an animal. The thick trees and the way sound echoed made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. I tried stopping again, just to test myself. And sure enough, as soon as I paused, the footsteps stopped too. That's when it hit me. I wasn't alone. I was being followed. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my vision blurred with fear. But my instincts were crystal clear. Don't speak. Don't run. Just keep walking. I stuck to the dense deer path, heading further into the woods, my gut screaming not to look back. I didn't know why, but I could feel it. Someone was right behind me, close enough that I could sense them, but I refused to turn around. Now here's the thing. I'm short and on the chubby side. Always have been. If you saw me, you'd probably think I couldn't outrun anyone, let alone in the middle of the woods. And honestly, that's probably what this creep was thinking too. But here's what they didn't know. I ran cross-country and track back then. I wasn't Olympic material or anything, but I could do a 7-minute mile, and hills were my specialty. I always did well on hilly courses, so while I didn't consciously think through all of this in the moment, somewhere deep down, I knew. Don't run. Not yet. So I kept walking, further into the woods, trying to act like nothing was wrong. My legs felt like jelly. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and everything around me blurred like I was walking through a nightmare. It was a feeling I've never experienced before or since. A primal, you're prey right now kind of terror. I didn't scream. I didn't even glance back. I just knew nobody would hear me if I did. I headed toward the train tracks, which I knew weren't far off. They'd give me the space I needed to run, clear ground, no branches to trip over. But the closer I got, the more I could feel them behind me. Just 5 or 10 feet back, following me like a shadow for what felt like forever. Maybe an eighth of a mile. Still, I didn't look back. I didn't even breathe differently. I just kept moving. As soon as the train tracks came into view, elevated on a gravel mound, I made my move. I bolted. Full speed. I scrambled up the hill on all fours, grabbing at weeds to haul myself up faster. And then I was sprinting along the tracks, lungs and legs burning, giving it everything I had. Behind me, I heard branches snapping in the woods below. I couldn't see who or what was there because the woods were so dark compared to the sunlight on the tracks. I just ran. I never actually saw the person, but I didn't need to. I knew their intentions were bad. Terrible even. And after that, I never took the deer path shortcut again. I didn't tell my parents about it either. Not until I was 18 and out of the house. I was more scared of being grounded back then than I was of explaining what happened.